I'm Gabe Sweezy,
I'm Matt Price.
and we're here interviewing Mr. Quandt on November 27th, 2018 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And behind the camera is Colin Sheasel.
Okay, so, Mr. Quandt, tell us about your childhood a little bit. Where were you born?
I was born in Saukville, Wisconsin, which is just west of Port Washington.
So did you grow up in Saukville, or were you
No, I was young. I was born there, and I think we moved maybe 3 years after that, 2 or 3 years, to like Brown Deer along the lake, Green Tree Road, that area.
So is that the neighborhood that you grew up in?
No, I think I was pretty young when we moved to the south side of Milwaukee, 17th and Greenfield. And I spent about 13 years there. And then we moved to the north side to like 23rd and Greenfield. I mean 23rd and North Avenue. And then I stayed there until I was about 18. And from there on, I went to college and everything else, you know.
Were there any differences you remember between living on the south side and north side?
Yeah, it seemed like the people on the south side were more involved. There was a Polish neighborhood, and they were all kind people. Not that the people on the north side weren't, but they weren't as friendly, and you didn't know the neighbors that well. But on the south side, like in our neighborhood, it was a community of maybe 6 or 8 blocks square,
Sure.
and most people knew each other in that atmosphere.
So would you say on the south side, that's where you met most of your childhood friends?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did you guys have any specific hangout spots, like where you wanted to go?
We lived just south of what is called the natatorium. It's a public pool, indoor. And we used to go there with our friends, and they had men's night on like Tuesday and Thursday and maybe Saturday, and then they had women on the other nights. And so we'd go with the guys there and swim all the time, you know. That would be one of the things. And then on sports, we were all out for sports, so that's where all our friends came from, you know.
Was your family close when you were growing up?
Were they what?
Were you close? Like, were you and your parents or any of your siblings?
Yeah, my brother and I were very close. My dad died when I was 11 years old, so and he had been sick for a few years, so we weren't real close. I didn't know him very well. And my mother then was working, so we had a good relationship, but we didn't have time for a lot of extra activity.
Where'd your mother work when you were growing up?
She worked at St. Luke's on the south side. I think it was on 3rd and Greenfield, right around that area. And then after she left that, she worked as a city health nurse in Milwaukee, a visiting nurse.
So where'd you go to school?
Well, I went to Mitchell.
Elementary, sorry.
What? Not
Elementary school.
Mitchell Street School and Longfellow. And then I went to St. Matthew's, and then I went to St. Boniface. We moved from the south side to the north side. That was elementary.
So growing up, did you have any jobs, like childhood jobs?
Yeah, I was a paper boy. Started like 12 years old and stuck to that for maybe 3 years or 4 years. And then when I got to be 16, I worked as a lifeguard and went into that field.
We'll get to that part later. But how much money did you make when you were throwing papers on people?
I can't remember that. It wasn't very much. That's all I know.
Did you like ride your bike around?
Yeah.
And you just threw newspapers on?
I put and I had the crank on my bike was broke, so I had only one pedal. So I had wires over it, so I slid my feet in that, and I would pedal with one foot, you know. Have all the bags in the back, hanging over the fender, and that's what I had.
So the money that you did make as a paper boy, what did you use it for?
It was so little, I can't remember. I mean, not probably going to the movies or buying candy or something like that. I don't know. It wasn't very much.
So when you were younger, did you and your friends get into any trouble?
Where can I start? No. Yeah, well, I mean, we vandalized things. I mean, like, one time we got into there was a bakery, but it was a commercial bakery. And we got a whole bunch of pies out of it.
So what'd you do with the pies?
Well, these were all, I think, stale pies that they just had stored in the place because it was like a Sunday. And we just took them off these racks. And then we went outside and a car would be coming by and throw out the car.
Did anybody like get out of the car and approach you? That got hit?
No, we were gone. No, we didn't get any trouble for it. I'm sure the guy was a little upset about it. Then we had streetcars, and we used to ride the streetcar every place we went. And yeah, and then we would be, it was a double-ended. The streetcar was double-ended, and when they came to the end of the track, the conductor just disconnected something up in the front, went to the other side, and that was the front end. They just reversed it and went back down the tracks. And we'd sit in the back, and on these streetcars, they had like a plunger you could push down that would discharge sand on the track. That was in case it was icy or whatever, snow. So we'd be back there, doing that. And the guy came back, and my mother was with us. She was sitting on one of the seats. We're in the back, and kicked us off the streetcar, and we had to walk home. Stuff like that, Nothing spectacular, though.
Do you remember how old you were when they took the streetcar out?
When they stopped using them?
Yeah.
It seemed like I was probably 12 or something like that. 10, 12 years old. I'm not exactly sure. It could have been 15.
So did you guys like have a car that you started using after the streetcar got taken out, or?
There were buses then that replaced them. They had the regular buses you see nowadays, and that's what we used to take. My dad had a car. What was it? A Nash, like a 1935 Nash, and we would use that. I didn't drive because, not to speak of, at least. They used to park it on the street, and we'd get in the car and turn the key on, and you could turn the key on, and just the starter would come on, and you wouldn't turn the engine on, but you could crank away and put the thing in gear and just back down the street. And we'd put it in gear again, go back up the street. And eventually when my dad would come out, this darn car doesn't work. What's wrong with these batteries? They're no good, Well, we never told him what we did.
So you didn't mention that you get in trouble at all, but at any point in your childhood, did you get in trouble with the law?
With the law?
Yeah, like the cops showed up?
Once or twice, I don't know. I used to ride my bike, and they knew me. They knew because we were all in a neighborhood, and I was riding off the street and back and forth and going around, and this cop stopped me, and said, you're not supposed to be doing that. You're going to get we're going to take the bike away or so. He said, come on, I'm taking you home. He takes me home and I said, I don't know him. I didn't do anything wrong. And well, he knew my parents, and so I was convicted. I mean, nothing ever happened.
So moving on to like your high school life, you mentioned in the pre-interview that you had attended a seminary. Why did you?
Yeah, when I was in ninth grade, to be a freshman in high school, I was St. Lawrence Seminary up at Fond du Lac near Mount Calvary, just east of Fond du Lac. Went there for a year, and it's all boys and it's dormitory style, and it was a real nice time. I enjoyed it.
So then, if you enjoyed it so much, why did you choose to leave?
Well, I didn't want to be in that kind of life, that's all. I mean, in other words, at one time I thought I wanted to be a priest, but it was sort of like a prep school too. There's kids that went to it that weren't going on to the seminary. And so it wasn't unusual that you'd go there for a couple of years and then go back to your regular school. And then I went back to high school at South Division. And I used to take the bus from the north side all the way to the south side because all my friends were on the south side and going to that school. And my brother was going to that school, and my sister went to that school. And so that's what I did for high school.
Okay, so you mentioned that you transferred to South Division. So when you went to South Division, did you know anybody there?
Well, that's where I'm saying I moved to the north side. Went to that's when I was in St. Boniface. Then I went to the seminary, and I came back, and I didn't want to go to North Division. That's what wasn't too far from me. So I just transferred to South Division, and that's where all my friends were, all the kids I grew up with and such.
So is that why you decided to go to South Division, or was there a reason you didn't want to go to North Division?
That's the reason I went to South Division. I didn't know too much about North Division at the time, but it got to be a rough school as time went on. You know, it's a minority area. Just after maybe I was 18 or so, and then it became more and more minorities. I lived in a neighborhood that was minorities, and I had no problems with it, but I just didn't want to go to school there with all my friends on the south side. So I took the bus every day.
So was the transition from like the seminary boarding school life to South Division, was it like really different for you?
You mean being in the seminary?
Yeah, switching from the seminary to South Division.
To a certain extent. But I mean, I was more comfortable in the sense that these were my friends, and then we could do things together. Plus, they had sports, and I went for football, swimming, and track. When the seasons came, and then you got to know all the athletes, and got more friends.
So were you really involved with sports once you came back to South Division?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
To what extent, or do you have any memories about it? Or?
Oh yeah, I got letters for 3 years, so it was like 3, 6, 9 letters. I mean, each time you're there, each year, you get a letter at the end of the season if you succeed. And I enjoyed football. I made all city, and track. I was okay in track, and then swimming. We were all good swimmers because we lived right next to the natatorium when we were little kids, and so we did okay on that too. But we didn't have our own pool, and so there wasn't a championship team. Although we did have Little C, that was teams that didn't have pools, and we ended up having our own city meet, but it was for Little City, and we won that one year. But yeah, that was my whole life at South Division. I mean, besides going to school.
Sure.
So in high school, did you get into any trouble?
No, when I was in grade school, I was always getting in trouble. But when I got into high school, after seminary and all, and I didn't get any trouble in the seminary either, but in high school, I never got in any trouble at all. I got along with everybody and good friends and such.
So what was your, when you think back to high school, what was your fondest memory?
Well, I had a girlfriend for 3 years. That was a fond memory. I think the being on the teams, and you travel around the city to all the different pools and stadiums and all that stuff, and that was the fondest memory. I mean, individual memories, I don't have any that I could pick out because it was all pretty nice.
So did your parents or did your mom or dad go to college?
Did they what?
Go to college?
Yeah, I'm not sure about my dad. He was a draftsman. You know what a draftsman is, He'd make all the drawings you see were done by hand. Now they're printed out on computers, but if you have a design, say for a building, you know, you want to see what it looks like and all. He did all that sort of thing, or any kind of mechanical thing that has to be drawn up. That's what he did. But I didn't know him that well because I think that was during the Depression, and they had a layoff for you know, some of the city workers, and he was sick quite a bit of the time, and then he ended up like working as a bartender for a while right down the block from us for a couple of years, and that's about all I can remember about him.
Do you remember anything from the Depression or anything your parents might have told you from during the Depression?
No, all I know is that there were 3 of us in the family. I mean, 3 kids. And we were poor, but we didn't know we were poor. I mean, in other words, you didn't know that there was maybe a better life. And so if you didn't get, like at Christmas time, we wouldn't get the gifts that some of my cousins would get, you know. And we'd complain about that, you know, we wanted something better, but not understanding what the situation is, it didn't bother us, I could say, you know.
So in high school, did you work in high school?
Yeah, I worked every summer as a lifeguard.
Where were you, where did you work, like, yeah, where'd you work as a lifeguard?
Well, I started out at Jackson Park, that's on the southwest side of Milwaukee, and then I went from there to Sheridan Park. And when I was at the other park, I was only 16 years old, or 15. You had to be 16, so I got my brother's birth certificate and I forged it and we turned it in, and we looked a lot alike, my brother and I, you know. So we were known as the twins, and we looked so much alike, a lot of people thought we were twins. But I got in a year before he did. He was older than I was. So I worked from the time I was 15 on, and when I worked out at on the southwest side of Jackson Park, then I think after a year or 2, I got a position out at Sheridan Park as a head guard, so I changed pools. And then I worked at Sheridan Park for quite a few years. I think I was lifeguard for 8 years. And then I used to also substitute at other pools around the city, or county. And so I got to be get around the whole city and everything as a lifeguard.
Were you ever like stationed in on Lake Michigan at all?
Yeah, I was at McKinley Beach. I don't know, there's another one, McKinley, and there's Bradford Beach. I think I was at Bradford Beach mostly.
So, you mentioned in the pre-interview that you used to like skiing when
Yeah.
you were younger. How'd you get started in skiing, being on the south side?
Well, Mitchell Park, I don't know if you know where that is, on Pierce Street, 27th, 27th and Pierce. And they had some nice hills there. I mean, they're nothing that they have nowadays, but they're pretty nice hills. So we used to we got some Army surplus skis, and we just take the bus out there and we'd ski down the hill. And then we used to ski behind County Stadium in Soldiers Home. There was a big ski jump there. And we'd go down the run, the landing was enough for us, you know. But we'd get on the bus with our skis and ride over there, and somebody'd have to stand down below because there was a road that went along the bottom of it, and make sure no cars were coming before we came down the hill. And so.
Did you ever wipe out?
Oh, many times, sure.
Any memorable ones?
And what?
Any memorable ones?
Not when I was younger. I don't remember that too much. I mean, we used to go off small jumps, and you were flexible, more flexible, and you could roll and fall and whatever. But then as I got older, and I think I was out with Colin, fell down and I pulled a ligament in my knee and something else, I don't know. And that's when just 5 years ago or so? So that was the only time I really can say I wiped out bad where I had some injuries.
So you said you liked to go skiing in the winter. Did you have any activities in the summer that you particularly enjoyed?
Well, as being a lifeguard, we swam all the time. I mean, you'd come to work early, you'd go swimming at noon hour, we'd play some type of water hockey or something, or stuff like that. And so we did a lot of that during the summer. Did some camping. We used to go fishing and things like that during the summer. Sure, it was a full summer.
Where did you usually like camp?
Well, we used to take our bikes, and this was, I think we were probably 13 or 14, and ride the bikes from Milwaukee to McQuantico, to, I can't think of the name of the lake out there. My brother and I, and maybe another guy, and then we set up we got some surplus hammocks with, the screening in or webbing, and put it between trees and sleep on that, and go swimming in the lake, and then after a few days, ride back home on the bike. So that was one of the places. It was Phantom Lake, that was the name of the lake. And then we'd go up north, sometimes camping, wherever we could, I think I went on a vacation once with my dad and mother and sister and brother, and that's the only vacation I can remember with them. I think I was, must have been 10 years old or so, and that was up further up north.
So you mentioned that you like to fish.
Yeah.
What was the biggest fish that you ever caught? Do you remember?
I don't know, maybe those snook. I think there was a 31-inch snook that was probably one of the bigger ones. And that's not a real big fish, but still. That's probably one of the bigger ones I caught.
So did you teach yourself how to fish?
Yeah, it was one of those things where there's not much to learn. I mean, you watch what the guy next to you is fishing with. If he's catching something, you copy him. I mean, yeah, and you read and such, and just you pick it up,
So you also mentioned in the pre-interview that you like to hunt.
Yeah.
So where did you usually go hunting?
Well, I don't know where we went locally, but we used to, we've got a cottage up north. We didn't have it at the time, but my stepfather was from up near Black River Falls. And he lived on a farm up there and such, and some of his relatives were up there. So when my mother and my stepfather got married, I was in the service at the time, probably 18 or so. And he brought us up. He said, "Come on up and go deer hunting." So we did a lot of deer hunting up there and grouse hunting, and that's where we did most of our hunting. And deer hunting, that was the major thing.
How old were you when you killed your first deer?
Probably 20 or so, 20, 22. Didn't start hunting deer until I was about that age, because I went in the service and then I came back and then I went deer hunting. I mean, that's when I started.
So when you were in high school, did you have any plans of going to college, or did you want to go into the military?
No, I went to college. I didn't have plans. The school I went to wasn't a prep school by any means. And the guys, when they got out of school, they went in the Army or Marines, and a lot of them got married right out 19, 20 years old. And so there wasn't any emphasis on that. There was a group that went to college, but there was no emphasis on it. But my brother did, and I followed him pretty much. What is he doing? What's the next thing to do, And so I started at Wisconsin Extension, which became UWM somewhat. That's downtown. And I went into forestry because I was interested in, that type of work. And I even started a forestry club early. I mean, I started going to it early before I was out of high school. And so I ended up going there, and then I went up to Madison, went out to Montana, and made the rounds of the colleges.
So you mentioned earlier you were living in the north side, but you went to South Division, and that there was a lot of Polish people when you lived there. Were most of your friends Polish then that went to South Division with you?
Yeah.
And was your family Polish?
No, we're German, primarily German.
How prevalent was maybe your German identity or significant to you when you were growing up?
Well, my mother and my aunts and my grandmother spoke German. And so when they ever got together and they had anything confidential to talk about, they just broke into German. And I picked up a few words that just from listening to what they were saying, like, but that's it. I never spoke German. Couldn't read it either. But there was a German identity because they all got together and sang German songs and everything else. All my relatives on my mother's side are German, and my father, I didn't get to know that side of the family real well, but on my mother's side, we were always over there.
So in the pre-interview, you mentioned your train, like you hopped on a train and you kind of traveled around. You want to talk about that?
Well, yeah, we used to hop freight trains, right in the city. And one time I remember out at Jackson Park, the trains were starting to pick up speed. And I grabbed onto the rail, the rails on the boxcar, and I went flying down the tracks under the train and back out. And I think about that, and I think just if I hadn't bounced out from under the tracks, I don't know what would have happened. But that's what we used to do, stuff like that. And then one time we went to Chicago. We wanted to see, I don't know what we were going down there for, see where the train went. And we got on the train, and the train got stopped and parked. They were just switching and everything else. And it got kind of late, so I said, we better get going back. So we hopped on another freight, and there was a Sherman tank on that. So we climbed in the tank and rode inside the tank all the way back to Milwaukee, But that's about the extent of it. We didn't do traveling all over the place at all.
So did you ever, anybody ever see you on the trains and call the authorities, or?
No. If they caught you, they used to have a caboose. You don't see that anymore. And some of the the guys that operated the switches and all that stuff, they would stay in the back. And then when they got to some place where they were switching cars and doing, these guys would get off and change all the switches around. If they caught you on there, they'd throw you off the train. But we never got into that situation.
So you decided after high school to attend college. Where did you go to college? All the places, where did you go?
Well, primarily up at Madison. I probably was up there 6 years or 7 years, something like that. And I went to Wisconsin Extension, did some night school at Marquette, and went out to Montana. And when I was out in Montana, that's where I was going to go into forestry. And the future didn't look real good for foresters and such. And so I came back. I was going to drop out of school, and the coach wanted me to stay on the team, and he wanted me at school. And they talked me into geology. They said, it's a little more, you don't have to live out in the woods. If you get married, for example, you're a forester, where do you live? If you have children, where do you send them to college or it's grade school when you're living out in the woods? But if you're in geology, you might live in a city and do work, it's not quite as bad. And so I switched over that and graduated with a science degree in geology. And then I worked for a while, and then I went back to school again, and night school in engineering. Then I ended up at Madison in engineering. Graduated from Madison, though. So that's the story of my college career.
So when you were at any of your colleges, were you in any Greek life?
In any what?
Any of the Greek life, like a frat?
Yeah, I went in a frat for a year or so, but I didn't like it, and I let it die.
What didn't you like about it?
I didn't know the guys real well, and I was in geology at that time, and it was expensive to belong to that sort of thing, and I just didn't fit into it, so I dropped out of it.
So out of all the colleges that you attended, what was your favorite memory?
Well, when I was up at Madison, I was on a track team, and we used to travel around and such. And I enjoyed that. That we flew out to Purdue one time for a meet, and that was nice that you could do that sort of thing. And you could get out of classes if you were an athlete. I mean, the professors would give you a little more leeway. But it was the sports up there that I enjoyed.
So you ran track in college. Did you swim in college as well, or
No.
any other sports?
I didn't run. I was a pole vaulter.
Okay.
Used to pole vault, but I didn't run, and I swam when I was in the first couple of years at Wisconsin Extension. Swam and was out for football too with them at Wisconsin Extension, not at Madison. So that's.
So after college, what you want to do? Like when you graduated, what did you say? Like what am I gonna do?
Yeah, but like in engineering, for example, they were looking for engineers. You could get a job just about any place, you know. And I wanted to come back to Milwaukee, so I got a job with a company called Square D, and did engineering work there for I don't know how many years until they moved out of town. And then I got a job with the Milwaukee Metro Sewage District and worked there for 26 years.
So after college, did you get married or?
Yeah, after I got out of the service, I had to go into service because I was in ROTC. And I went to officers training school and all that stuff, and then ended up in, for 3 years, I was in active duty only for 6 months, but then I had to go to reserves. And then I met my wife, future wife, and decided I should probably go back to school and get finish a degree in engineering. So that's when I got married, after I went back to school, you know.
So you were in the ROTC.
Yeah.
And you pole vaulted, and even swam at Wisconsin Exchange sometimes. So, and you were dealing with switching disciplines. So it sounds like you had a pretty full, busy schedule when you were in college.
Yeah, we were. Yeah, you were busy all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how long did it take you and your wife to get married after you met her?
I'd say about a year, something like that, a little over a year.
When did you meet her?
Like 1963 or something, like 62.
Was that after you'd graduated?
Yeah, it was after I graduated the first time in geology. And I didn't work in geology, though. Just one summer I worked in geology. And then I went to work for another company, John Oster. I don't know if you ever heard of Oster, or Osterizer Blender. It was on the north side of Milwaukee. And then I was on active duty. Then I got put in reserves, and I met her on a blind date. It was a blind date for a blind date because the girl I was going to go out with, she was with her father. They went down to New Orleans. It was over Easter break. So the girl that fixed me up with my wife, future wife, fixed me up. She had fixed me up with a different girl first. And then when that one dropped out, ended up going out with my wife, and took it from there and got married about a year later.
So you mentioned being in the military. So that was right after college, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what made you want to enter the military?
Well, that was just before the event. It was during the Korean War, and then that was dying down. Then you could get deferred. I wanted to get through college. That was my main interest. So if you were in college, you could get a deferment until you graduated. And the way you could get that, you had to go into ROTC the first 2 years. It was like mandatory. And then after that 2 years, they'd ask you if you want to stay in or if you wanted to stay in, you could ask yourself, you know. And then I went to what am I thinking? I went to Montana, and I was in ROTC, but then I dropped out because I said, I'm out here in Montana, I don't want to bother with ROTC. And all of a sudden I get a draft notice, you know, what's this? Well, you're supposed to be, I said, I'm in school. Well, we showed that you were in Wisconsin Extension, and you disappeared, and there was no record of you anymore. And they didn't know I went out to Montana. So he said, well, you better get your records in here fast. So I got the records in fast, and I said, okay, I'm going to sign up for for the next 2 years for ROTC. I don't want this to happen again. So that's how I got into service. I mean, it was a deferment thing. And then you got to be an officer, and that was a nicer life than just being a regular soldier, I guess. I don't know.
So what branch were you in?
Army, Corps of Engineers.
So, in the Corps of Engineers, you're an officer. What was like the projects that they put you to work on?
Well, one of them was that there was a river running through the post, and then there was a road coming down, and then there was a floating pontoon boat across the river, a series of pontoons, and they had a roadway attached to that. And then going up the other side. So the guy said, the officer told me, he said, clean off the hill, get all the trees that are out of the way, and shape that hill, and then that's the project you want. Okay. Well, he didn't tell me that I'm supposed to put seed down or anything, and I got out of the service at that time, so that was my major project, just to have that hill and the slope fix up.
Sorry, but where were you stationed?
At Fort Knox, Kentucky.
Did you see any of the cold?
Did I what?
See
Oh,
any of
yeah.
the cold?
No, they wouldn't let you near the place. I've got pictures of it, but that's the closest I got to it.
So you mentioned also in the pre-interview that you won a rifle shooting badge. Want to tell us about that a little bit?
Well, you had to pass your marksmanship. In other words, you had to know how to shoot a rifle, because that's what soldiers do. And so if you've got a marksmanship badge, that's nothing to write home about, but I mean, you had to get the thing. But they had maybe different grades of that, and I just got the regular rifle, badge. There's nothing to it.
So how many years were you in the service for?
I think it was something like 2.5 years, 3 years, because I had to go in a reserve. And I was only on active duty 6 months at that time, and I'm glad I got out, because then Vietnam really heated up and I got out just in time.
So during those 6 months, do you have any memories that stick out to you or anything like that?
Yeah, we used to build bridges, and I remember when we were in camp, we had a simulated attack across a river or backwaters and such, and get on the other side and shooting and all that stuff. And that was kind of interesting. I mean, built the bridges and be about 90 degrees out, and you'd be sweating like mad because you had all these fatigues on. And then when you completed the bridge, you took the commanding officer, and he was running the project, and threw him in the water, see? So we all just hung on and all jumped in the water because it was so darn hot. And then, come on, you guys, get out of the water. We got work to do here, with your uniform on and everything, just jumped in.
So where were you during those 6 months? Were you also in Fort Knox? Or?
Well, the first part was at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. That was officers training. And that's just south of Washington, D.C. And then I got stationed at Fort Knox, Kentucky. And then I came home, and then I had to go on reserve duty,
So how long were you in the reserves?
Well, it was about 2.5 years. So it was, I think, a total of 3 years I was in there or something.
So after you left the military, did you know what you wanted to do?
Well, I went back to school. I worked for a while, and I went back to school.
For engineering, right?
Pardon?
For engineering?
Yeah. Well, first time was, no, it was for engineering because I had a degree when I was in the service. Yeah.
So where'd you go to school then after military?
After the military, Madison, primarily Madison.
So you mentioned you got out right before Vietnam. What was the, I guess, public census or opinion on the war in Milwaukee when you were here?
Well, there was a lot of demonstrations against it.
Right.
You know, they were demonstrating against it, and there was an article in the paper just recently about anniversary of where they went. Some of these guys went down there and stole all these board records. You know, the draft board records, and burned them in the square downtown, and some got arrested and such. And so there was a lot of negativity about it. People didn't think it was fair. I didn't have a real big opinion of it. I thought you should follow the law, but as it turned out, it probably was a rotten war, you know.
Do you remember, so you said you didn't have a huge opinion on it. Do you remember maybe how your family felt about it or any of your friends?
No, we didn't really talk politics much. I mean, it's nothing like today.
Sure.
You know, my stepfather was a iron worker, and so he was very liberal, or he was a Democrat, no doubt, and my mother was probably the same. And other people I worked with were just the opposite, conservative, you know. But I never got involved in it very much.
So you mentioned that your stepfather was an iron worker?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where did he work?
Well, he worked for Price Erecting, which was a iron working company.
That's my family company.
Are you kidding?
No. That's a small world.
Yeah. And he helped, he worked down at Oak Creek when they were building that power plant and remodeling it. And he was the type of guy that was always dependable. And when things got tight, you know, they lay off some guys, they always kept him. And so he worked there for quite a few years until he got sick, and then that was the end of it, you know.
So when you returned to Milwaukee, who was mayor?
Mayor Meyer.
Mayor Meyer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what was the first job you got right after college?
That was at in geology. That was at John Oster. I worked at John Oster in time study and all that sort of thing, you know. And then after that, I went back to night school and started on the second one.
So what was your second job then?
I worked at Square D, and that was in quality control. So I had an inspection department and stuff like that, you know, incoming inspection and then floor inspection, and that was a job. And
then you talked briefly about it, but let's go back to it. You were a sewage manager for a long time.
Yeah.
Tell us about that a little bit.
Well, that entailed maintaining the plant. The plant had 30 or 40 buildings, 3 miles of road, and I don't know how many basins and digesters and big engines for producing air for the aeration system, and generators, and all that had to be maintained, and that was my responsibility with the staff I had. I had about 50 people at that time, and they did everything. We had centrifuges and, you know, all sorts of filters and pumps, and if you like mechanics, it was a dream job. I mean, and I like mechanics.
So how did you get your job in the sewage commission?
Well, when I got out, I had a lot of supervisory background, and I worked at Square D, and they moved to North Carolina. And my father-in-law was head of the sewage commission. So he got me in. There's a new plant on the south side that was just going online, and he got me in as a supervisor. And then after he retired, they got some new people in, and they reorganized and just moved up in the organization to the manager's position.
So you mentioned that you worked on the south side. That's where you originally got your job. Did you work there?
In Oak Creek.
Oh, in Oak Creek?
Yeah.
Is that the only place where you worked in the sewage commission?
I worked at Jones Island for maybe a year, and then when I got near retirement age, the system went private. In other words, that used to be separate entity, separate taxing authority, the sewage commission. And what they did is they went private. They got a company from, I think it was from France, I'm not sure. United Water came in and took over the plant, and then that was all. It wasn't public anymore. And so I was right near retirement age, so I retired at that time because of the privacy, that they went private.
So you retired on Jones Island?
No, I was supposed to go down there. I worked out at Oak Creek, and when they went private, then they reorganized, and I was going to go down to Jones Island and take over that position. And I said, no, I'm really right near retirement. I don't want to go through a whole change again, start running with a new crew, so I retired.
So what was your main job as a supervisor? Were you just a supervisor, or did you work directly with the
Well, I was a manager. Yeah, the manager. I had 5 supervisors under me, and I had, I think, 50 people total, And we had one of the basic things was making out the budget, and the budget was like $5 million alone, And then you had to, come up with plans of what equipment you need and what you're going to do and who's going to do what, and just maintaining the plant, making sure everything runs.
So while you worked at the sewage commission, where were you living?
Where I live now, up in Mequon. Used to drive round trip 40 miles a day, so.
So when did you move to your Mequon house?
Right after, maybe a year after I got married. We lived in an apartment, and then we moved into this area, into that house.
What was the main difference that stood out to you from growing up in the city than moving to the suburbs?
Well, the houses are not right next to each other. I mean, where I lived on the north side, there was a walkway between the houses and maybe a little bit of dirt on each side of that walkway, and you could touch both houses if you wanted to, And you had a smaller background. It was just more crowded and less private.
So did you miss the city at all?
No, not one bit.
So were you happy to get away from the city, maybe relax a little bit more, have a little more privacy?
Yeah, you do have more privacy out there. But in the city, when I grew up, you knew the neighbors, and everybody seemed to, within the block, everybody knew everybody. Here, I live in a community where it's changed. I've been there for 40 or 50 years, and it's changed over, and I don't know a lot of new people coming in, but that's my fault for not participating in some of the, they have parties and such, and I don't go to all those. And so I don't know some of these people. But on the south side, they were just friendlier. Now, we moved to the north side on North Avenue, and that wasn't, that was crowded. That wasn't that friendly either. It seemed on the north side, they just were a little more standoffish or something. I don't know what it was. I just had that feeling.
So, did you live in Milwaukee during the majority and the tension of the Cold War?
No, I think the Cold War was, when did the Cold War start?
50s-ish.
Yeah, 50s. I was out of school by then. I mean, I was going to college by then, and so I didn't know what happened, what was going on there at the time. I remember in school, I think it started in grade school though, that we were always praying for the conversion of the Russians, because they were atheists and such, and that was always part of the prayer in church and school, at the Catholic schools.
So did you ever? So you didn't really remember, but did you ever fear Milwaukee ever being hit by a nuclear strike? Or
They used to tell us, practice, get under your table, under your desk, and all that stuff. But I remember when Pearl Harbor happened, and my sister was 2 years older than I was, and I think it was 1940 or something like that. 41, yeah. And she was upset, real upset. And what are you upset about? Well, we're going to get bombed. We're going to get bombed. We're going to come over here. And I was too young to even know. 7 years old or something like that, 8 years old, and I didn't know what's happening. It didn't bother me at all. But there were a lot of people thought we were going to be attacked.
So we learned about that on the Summerfest grounds. There used to be like missiles and stuff. Did you ever like see any of that?
I remember they had them there. There used to be where the Summerfest grounds are now. There used to be an airfield down there. And it was just a couple runways, but that was when I was probably under 10 years old when they had. Then they eliminated that, and there was industry down there and such, But there were missiles. There's missile sites on Brown Deer and 43. It's in Bayside, and they actually put silos down into the ground. And there were Minuteman missiles in there. Now, I didn't live up there at that time, but that's what used to be up there.
So you mentioned also that you were very into sailing.
Yeah.
So how did you first get started?
Well, we were lifeguards, and some of the guys I worked with, all the guys were interested in water. I mean, boating, swimming, and all that stuff. And one of the guys, his father was harbor master down at South Shore, and he was into sailing. Not the father, but the kid was. And so we got to join the South Shore Yacht Club and bought a boat. It was a National One Design 17-footer, and kept it down there. And we got into racing, but we didn't know what we were doing with racing and such. But that's how we got started. As a matter of fact, my friend bought the boat, and I would sail it, and then he never did anything. Finally, he just gave me the boat. I bought it from him for practically nothing, and that's how I got into sailing.
So did your buddy teach you how to sail a boat, or did you kind of?
The one guy was there were two brothers, and one was a perfect teacher. If you screwed up or something, he didn't seem to care. But the other guy was harping all the time. He was nervous and all that. And but those were the instructors we had. And then we got into racing down there, and didn't do much about that because we didn't know what we were doing, But we sailed down there for maybe 3 years or more. And then we went into, we used to take the boat up to Door County and sail up at Door County. You know where that is, don't you? Yeah. So.
What was like? So you did race.
Yeah.
Right? So what was like the most memorable race that you've ever raced?
Well, I think the Mac race. You know what the Mac race is? They race from Chicago to Mackinac Island. That's a long race. They take 3 days, 2 or 3 days to get up there. And the first time we went up, there was no wind, and we were just drifting and drifting. And usually you get up there on a Monday, and they have a party for all the crew members, and the wives come up and all that. And we're still on the lake, and there's a lot of us were still on the lake, and we ran out of food, and we ran out of water, and we could have just gone in, but there was no wind, and the batteries are dead. And you could accept help, but then you're out of the race. So finally the wind picked up, and we got back in. So that wasn't a real pleasant one that time. But the second time we went, the wind was real nice, and we had a real nice run all the way up there, enjoyable. So that was probably the best we had.
Did you win the race that time?
No.
So how many boats have you owned?
Only 2. Three. 3, the National, and then there was a Balboa That was a 27 trailable boat, had a swing keel. And we used to take that up to Door County and leave it up there for the summer and go up every weekend. And then I bought a Catalina 30, and that was a much bigger boat. And we kept it up at Door County and a mooring up there, sailed up there a lot, went across the lake, went all over the place.
Still sail?
I haven't sailed in a couple of years now. I sold the boat.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did you only sail like in Wisconsin?
Well, we sailed across the lake to Michigan and sailed up to Mackinac Island and a little bit further, northern Lake Michigan. So it was all along the shoreline of Lake Michigan we sailed.
So when you sailed across to Michigan, was it a lot longer than you expected?
Yeah, you could put the engine on, but the engine was very small, and so you couldn't go over 7 knots. And so it would take us 10, 12 hours to get across. And so that turned out to be longer than we thought it would be. But if you had nice wind, you could cut that down. And we used to race across, not in my boat, but race from South Shore Yacht Club over to, forgot the name of the town on the other side, directly across.
Muskegon.
What?
Muskegon.
Yeah, that's not the site we ended up at. But anyway, it's close to there. And you sail all night long, you know. And then you sail back on another race, and did that several times. And raced up at Port Washington, I'm a member of the yacht club. And they had offshore racing. So it was pretty much of my life for maybe 30 years.
So these big like regattas that you used to sail in, was it like your first experience? Was it like kind of eye opening to see how many people like you were racing against, or?
Well, the one from South Shore across, that would take off on a Friday night, and they had, I think, over 200 boats, something like that. And you get out there and boats all over the place, you know. And the Mac race, that's another one that has a lot of boats in it. And they stagger the starting times and such so that it's not piled up at the start line, you know.
So you mentioned that you have sailed at night.
Yeah.
Did you have any close calls, like with other boats in a regatta at night, or?
No, I think maybe it wasn't a real close call, but with all these boats going across at night, you can see their running lights and such, you know. And also we see these lights coming along, and here's a barge towing, or a tugboat towing a barge, and he's got his lights all over the place, and he's flashing around. He probably didn't know what's going on here. All these boats show up in the middle of the lake. So if you went between those two, you might get in trouble, but everybody knew what to do and get around them, let them go through. But that was probably one of the scarier parts.
So you also mentioned that you scuba dive.
Yeah, I used to scuba dive too.
So where did you go? Like, where was the main spot?
Well, first of all, you had to go down to, for your training, we went to a quarry and dove down in the quarry with the equipment on. Then we had like a test, part of the test to show you can do the stuff and all that. Down at South Shore, we swam from the beach area out to the break wall underwater, and on a given course you had a compass and all that stuff. And there was a boat that sank out there, but there's nothing but debris on the bottom. There's nothing there. And that was probably the only place I really did scuba diving.
So it was like, did you explore any other like shipwrecks in Lake Michigan?
No, I can't remember. I don't think I did.
Okay.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about that we didn't ask or you didn't get the chance to mention?
No, I think we covered quite a bit. I mean, could go on for hours, I suppose, if you kept asking questions, but.
Well, if you have anything memorable or anything like that.
Well, like sailing, for example, we got caught in a storm out there one time. We had 60-knot winds, and it just laid the boat over on its side. It was in Death's Door, that's between Gills Rock and Washington Island, at the north end of Door County, And the wind just came up, and for about an hour, 2 hours, my daughter was down below praying like mad. And yeah, it was a memorable situation there, It lasted about 2 or 3 hours, and it just
Flew over?
blowing. I had an inflatable life raft, and the thing was 11 feet tall, long, and it had a motor on the back. And I had tied it onto the back of the boat, and that's what we used to go to shore and back and forth. And when the wind hit, the thing was airborne, and I had a couple oars tied onto it, and the boat was just spinning like this in the air with the motor on, and finally just snapped off and went into the water. And I thought I'll never see that again. But when we got into the dock, there's a boat, a ferry boat that takes cars across and back. Well, they spotted it and pulled it out. And so we had called the Coast Guard and told them that, we're out there, just so you know, and it's really blowing, and just so you know we're out here. We might need assistance in the future, whatever. Well, we got into the dock, and I said we might as well call the Coast Guard and tell them we're in dock safely and all that. Tell them about the boat. So I told them about the Metzler, and this ferry boat docked right next to us over the dock. I said, "Hey, we got your boat. It's right over here." So I went over there, no damage on it or anything, and it turned the boat back to us. But that was probably the most memorable sailing experience I had.
So when you were living in Quandt, you're kind of far away from the city, but did you still follow like Milwaukee sports and Milwaukee events?
Not too much. I mean, I followed football. I wasn't into basketball, although I did play basketball at a seminary, but that was, very easy, not real serious. But I didn't follow them too much. And the Brewers, I don't follow them too much either. I'm more into like the Green Bay Packers,
That's about all the questions we have for you. Thank you for your time.
Well, you're welcome. I enjoyed it.